I own a restaurant not far from my husband's workplace, so during his break time he usually comes over to eat. I never had a problem with it because he's my husband. He eats the best meals we prepare for the day, and I never ask him to pay, but recently, he started coming with 3 of his friends. They would all eat the best food, drink expensive wine, enjoy themselves, and then leave without paying a single kobo. At first, I tried to be patient, but it got to a point where it was affecting my business. I explained to my husband that what he was doing could eventually ruin my restaurant. Instead of understanding, he told me I should be happy that he and his friends enjoy my food. I then told him that if he wanted to continue eating there for free, he should at least come alone. Unfortunately, he ignored me. The next day, he returned again with his friends and placed their usual order. This time, I calmly told them it would be a pay before service. My husband immediately got angry and accused me of embarrassing him in front of his friends. But I stood my ground and refused to serve them without payment. He eventually left with his friends, and ever since then, he hasn't come home for a whole week and refuses to take my calls. The first 2 days felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. I told myself maybe the silence was necessary. Maybe we both needed space to cool down because our arguments had become too frequent in the past few months. Every small issue turned into shouting. Every conversation somehow became about pride, money, or respect. I was tired of feeling like the bad person simply because I wanted to protect the business I worked hard to build. That restaurant was not given to me by anybody. I built it from the ground up after years of struggling, borrowing money, waking up before sunrise to buy fresh ingredients from the market, and standing for long hours cooking until my feet became swollen. The restaurant sat near a busy road surrounded by small shops, offices, and noisy streets filled with taxis and motorcycles. During lunchtime, the compound outside became crowded with workers laughing loudly, women selling fruits, and drivers resting under trees while eating grilled meat. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business. So after my husband stormed out angrily that day, people started talking immediately. Some customers whispered that our marriage was having problems. Others blamed me for embarrassing him publicly. A few secretly supported me but were too afraid to say it openly. By the 4th day, I began missing him despite my anger. I missed hearing his footsteps at night. I missed the sound of his voice in the morning even when we argued. Marriage can be strange because sometimes the same person who causes your tears is also the one whose absence hurts you the most. I tried calling him many times, but he never answered. I sent messages asking where he was, but there was no response. That same week, a black luxury vehicle stopped outside my restaurant during the late afternoon. The entire compound seemed to pause because everybody noticed it immediately. Men sitting outside stopped eating. The waitresses near the kitchen window started whispering to each other. Even the security guard stood straighter than usual. The door opened slowly, and that was the first time I saw Basa Ngonga walking into my restaurant. He was dressed simply but carried himself like a man used to authority. Calm eyes. Expensive watch. Soft voice. The kind of man who did not need to raise his voice for people to listen. At first, I did not know who he was. I simply welcomed him like every customer. But the moment one of my workers whispered his name, the atmosphere changed immediately. He sat alone near the far corner of the restaurant under the open compound where flowers climbed the walls and soft music played from old speakers. The evening sun reflected against the glass tables while workers from nearby offices continued eating and laughing loudly around him. Yet somehow, despite all the noise, he looked completely untouched by it. I walked over to take his order myself because my waitresses suddenly became nervous. He smiled slightly and said he had heard my restaurant served the best grilled fish in the area. I thanked him politely and recommended some dishes. He listened carefully, almost too carefully, as if he enjoyed hearing me speak. That day he stayed longer than expected. After eating, he ordered wine and asked me to join him for a short conversation. Normally I refuse such invitations from customers because I believed it crossed professional boundaries, but something about him felt different. Maybe it was because my heart was already heavy from fighting with my husband. Maybe it was because for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me with admiration instead of criticism. We talked for nearly an hour while evening slowly covered the compound outside. He asked about my restaurant, my life, how I started the business, and whether I was married. I answered carefully at first, but somehow the conversation became easier. He spoke about traveling, politics, business, and life in ways that made ordinary stories sound interesting. Before leaving, he complimented the restaurant and handed me his card. He told me he would return again, and he did. 2 days later. His vehicle appeared again during lunch hour. This time he came with security men who stayed outside while he ate inside quietly. Customers kept staring at him, but he seemed unbothered. After eating, he asked if I had finally spoken to my husband. I was surprised he remembered I told him no. He shook his head slowly and said something that stayed in my mind the entire night: a woman who builds something successful deserves respect, not punishment. Those words affected me more than I wanted to admit. For weeks my husband had ignored me completely. No calls, no visits, nothing. Yet here was another man listening to me carefully, speaking kindly, noticing my struggles, and making me feel seen again. Soon his visits became regular. Every time he arrived, the entire restaurant atmosphere changed. Workers became excited because he tipped generously. Customers pretended not to stare while secretly watching him. Some women nearby even started coming regularly hoping to see him. But strangely, his attention always returned to me. Sometimes he would invite me to sit with him after the lunch crowd reduced. Other times he brought expensive wine and insisted I relax for a moment instead of working endlessly. He told me I worked too hard and carried too much stress in my eyes. One evening after closing time, rain started falling heavily across the open compound outside the restaurant. Water splashed loudly against the roof while motorcycles rushed past the street trying to escape the storm. Most workers had already left, and I was preparing to close when his vehicle arrived unexpectedly. He entered smiling and asked why I was still working so late. I laughed softly and told him restaurants never truly sleep. He ordered coffee for both of us and we sat near the entrance watching the rain. The compound smelled of wet soil and grilled meat from nearby vendors. Streetlights reflected beautifully against the puddles outside. That night he spoke less like an important official and more like a lonely man tired of public life. He admitted that power often attracts fake people. He said very few people treated him normally anymore. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said I made him feel peaceful. My heart started beating faster. I knew I should have ended the conversation there. I knew married women should not entertain emotional closeness with another man. But loneliness can weaken even strong people. My marriage already felt broken. My husband still had not returned home. And every day I spent with Basa felt lighter than the last. Eventually our conversations moved beyond the restaurant. He started sending drivers to pick me up after work. At first we only went for dinner in quiet places outside town where people would not recognize him easily. He loved open compounds with music, soft lights, and privacy. We would sit for hours drinking wine while live bands played old songs in the background. Sometimes he made me laugh so hard my stomach hurt. For the first time in many months, I felt beautiful again. He bought me dresses I could never afford myself. Perfume, jewelry, expensive shoes. At first I resisted because accepting gifts felt dangerous, but he insisted. He said a hard-working woman deserved to enjoy life too. Meanwhile my husband remained silent. 1 entire week became 2 weeks, then 3. By then, rumors had already started spreading around the area that I was close to an important man. Some people claimed they saw me entering luxury vehicles at night. Others exaggerated stories until they barely resembled truth anymore. My workers became curious but too afraid to ask questions directly. One evening, after another argument-filled phone call with my husband, I completely broke down crying in front of Basa. We were sitting outside a private guest house surrounded by palm trees and dim lights. Warm wind moved through the open compound while distant music played from another building nearby. I told him everything: how my husband constantly disrespected my work, how he used my restaurant like it belonged to him, how every argument ended with him blaming me, how abandoned I felt. Basa listened quietly before pulling me close. He told me no woman should feel unwanted in her own marriage. That night was the first time he kissed me. I wish I could say I resisted harder. I wish I could say I immediately left. But I didn't. Months of frustration, loneliness, anger, and emotional exhaustion exploded all at once inside me. The attention he gave me felt intoxicating. His touch felt comforting at a moment when my marriage already seemed dead. From that night, our hidden relationship truly began. He rented private places where nobody would disturb us. Sometimes he traveled for work and returned with gifts from other countries. Sometimes he closed entire restaurants just so we could eat privately without cameras or gossip. Meanwhile, whenever my husband finally called, our conversations turned cold and bitter within minutes. He accused me of becoming proud because of my business success. I accused him of abandoning our marriage. Neither of us apologized properly. One afternoon, my husband suddenly appeared at the restaurant without warning. The entire compound became tense. Immediately, I was serving customers when I saw him standing near the entrance looking around slowly. He looked tired, angry, and suspicious. My heart almost stopped because Basa had visited earlier that same day. My husband asked to speak privately. We walked behind the restaurant near the storage area where empty crates were stacked against the wall. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and cooking oil. He demanded to know whether I was seeing another man. I denied it instantly, even though guilt already filled my chest. He stared at me silently for a long moment before saying people had been talking. According to him, his friends claimed they saw me entering expensive vehicles late at night. I became defensive immediately and accused him of spying on me instead of fixing our marriage. The argument exploded again. He shouted that I had changed completely. I shouted back that he abandoned me first. Workers and customers nearby pretended not to listen while clearly hearing everything. Eventually he stormed away again. That night I cried alone after closing the restaurant. Deep inside, I knew I was crossing dangerous lines emotionally and physically. But at the same time, returning to my husband no longer felt simple. Too much anger already existed between us. Basa noticed my sadness immediately during our next meeting. He told me not to let anyone make me feel guilty for wanting happiness, and slowly, I stopped fighting the relationship completely. Weeks turned into months. Our secret became deeper. He would sometimes arrive unexpectedly during busy evenings, sit quietly in the open compound surrounded by laughing customers, and watch me walk proudly like I belonged to him already. When our eyes met across the restaurant, I felt excitement mixed with fear every single time. Some nights after closing, we drove through the city for hours talking about life while music played softly inside the car. Other nights we escaped to quiet resorts outside town where nobody knew us. I began living two separate lives. During the day, I was the hardworking restaurant owner struggling to save her marriage. At night, I became the hidden lover of a powerful man, and the worst part was that I no longer knew which version of myself was real anymore. After that period, everything about my restaurant slowly began to change, and honestly, people around the area noticed it long before I admitted the truth to myself. Before meeting Basa in Gonga, my restaurant was simple and struggling. The chairs were old wooden ones that made noise whenever customers moved. The walls had started fading because of heat and smoke from years of cooking. During rainy days, water leaked slightly through one side of the roof near the storage room, and sometimes I had to place buckets there while pretending everything was normal. I still worked hard every single day because I believed consistency could eventually grow a business, but deep down I knew I was exhausted. Yet once Basa became part of my life, the atmosphere around the restaurant transformed little by little, like somebody pouring fresh light into an old dark room. At first the changes were small. He paid for new tables without even informing me beforehand. One morning I arrived and found workers unloading expensive furniture from a truck parked outside the compound. Dark polished tables, soft chairs, beautiful lights imported from abroad. I stood there speechless while the workers carried everything inside. When I called him asking why he spent so much money, he simply laughed softly and said he wanted the restaurant to reflect the woman who owned it. That sentence stayed in my mind for days. Soon after that, he began visiting even more frequently, sometimes during lunch. Sometimes late evening after most customers had left. Other times he came unexpectedly just to sit quietly and drink coffee while watching me move around the restaurant giving instructions to workers. The strange thing was that he never behaved loudly despite his power. He preferred privacy. Calmness. Observation. But the workers began noticing the closeness between us. One waitress named Mira used to smile secretly whenever his vehicle entered the compound because she already understood what nobody dared say openly. Even the cook started preparing his favorite meals immediately whenever security vehicles appeared outside because everybody knew who the guest was. At first Basa only sat in the public dining area. Then slowly he began asking for more private spaces where he could relax without attention. Some evenings the restaurant became crowded with businessmen, drivers, government workers, and music from nearby bars, making privacy impossible. He once joked that an important man deserved at least one quiet corner in the restaurant belonging to the woman he cared about. That joke eventually became reality. Behind the restaurant, near the storage side, there was an old unused room where we once kept extra supplies years earlier. The place was dusty, forgotten, and filled with broken shelves. One afternoon Basa walked there with me while inspecting the restaurant. Sunlight entered through tiny openings in the wall while old boxes remained piled in corners. He looked around slowly before saying the room had potential. I laughed because the place looked terrible, but within weeks, workers arrived again. This time quietly and mostly at night. The old room was renovated completely. New paint covered the walls. Beautiful curtains appeared. A soft carpet was placed inside. There was even a small refrigerator, air conditioning, and comfortable furniture unlike anything else in the restaurant. He said powerful people often needed privacy during business meetings, so nobody questioned it openly when the room became restricted from ordinary workers. But both of us knew the truth. That room slowly became our secret world, hidden inside the same restaurant where customers laughed, ate food, and discussed ordinary life without suspecting what happened behind those walls. Some evenings Basa arrived through the back entrance after dark while the restaurant remained busy in front. Music played outside in the open compound. Customers ordered grilled meat and expensive drinks. Workers moved quickly carrying trays between tables. And meanwhile, hidden behind the restaurant, another life existed quietly between me and him. He would remove his jacket, loosen his tie, sit comfortably, and finally relax away from cameras, politics, and public pressure. Sometimes we only talked for hours inside that room. Those conversations became addictive to me. He spoke about business deals, political tension, powerful people, and the loneliness that came with authority. I listened carefully while pouring wine or serving him food. Personally, other times he simply pulled me close the moment the door locked behind us. The affection between us became intense because it was built on secrecy, longing, and emotional escape. Whenever he kissed me, it felt dangerous and comforting at the same time. My heart constantly raced because we both knew discovery could destroy everything, and yet that danger almost made the relationship stronger. The more time passed, the more attached we became. Soon Basa stopped treating the restaurant like a temporary interest. He began investing seriously into it. He brought professional designers from the city. The outside compound was redesigned with flowers, lights, fountains, and elegant sitting areas. The old noisy roof was replaced completely. New kitchen equipment arrived. Imported wine appeared on the menu. The signboard outside became larger and brighter until people passing nearby started calling it one of the fanciest restaurants around the area. Customers increased rapidly. Government officials started visiting regularly after hearing Basa himself ate there often. Businessmen held meetings there. Rich couples came during evenings for music nights. My restaurant, once struggling to survive, suddenly became fashionable. People started saying I was lucky, but luck had nothing to do with it. Every improvement carried hidden emotional cost because the deeper the restaurant grew under his support, the more dependent my life became on him too. He visited almost every day, sometimes only for 1 hour, sometimes until midnight, and every visit pulled us deeper into secrecy. There were nights after closing time when the open compound outside became silent, except for distant traffic and insects singing near the flowers. Workers would leave one by one until only trusted security remained outside. Then I would walk quietly toward the hidden room while my heart beat heavily inside my chest. Inside, the atmosphere always felt separated from reality. Dim lights, cold air conditioning, expensive perfume lingering in the air, wine glasses on the table, soft music from his phone playing quietly in the background. He often told me he hated returning home after spending time with me because public life felt empty compared to those hidden moments. Sometimes he arrived exhausted after meetings, sat down heavily, and rested his head against my shoulder without speaking. Those moments strangely affected me more than the gifts or money. Seeing a powerful man lower his guard only around me created emotional attachment I never expected. Still, guilt followed me constantly whenever I stood outside greeting customers in the bright open compound. I sometimes caught myself wondering what people would think if they knew the truth hidden behind the restaurant walls. Women complimented my success while secretly envying my growing business. Men praised my intelligence for expanding quickly. Yet none of them understood the complicated emotional mess underneath everything. My husband still existed in my life too, though increasingly distant. Sometimes he called unexpectedly after weeks of silence. Other times he appeared at home acting cold and suspicious. Our marriage became full of uncomfortable silence. He noticed the restaurant improving rapidly and asked many questions about where the money came from. I lied constantly. I told him business was simply doing better. He never fully believed me. One evening he visited the restaurant unexpectedly during dinner rush. The compound was crowded with expensive vehicles and well-dressed customers laughing under hanging lights. Live music played near the fountain while waitresses moved elegantly carrying wine bottles between tables. My husband stood near the entrance staring around slowly with confusion written all over his face because the restaurant barely resembled the place he once mocked during arguments. Then he noticed Basa security vehicles parked discreetly outside. The atmosphere inside my chest froze immediately. Thankfully Basa himself was hidden inside the private room. At that moment I quickly walked toward my husband before he moved further inside. He asked sharply whether important politicians now financed my business. I forced a nervous laugh and told him successful restaurants naturally attract wealthy customers, but his eyes remained suspicious. That night after he finally left, I rushed behind the restaurant trembling from fear. Basa remained calm as always. He poured wine slowly while listening to me panic about almost being discovered. Then he smiled slightly and told me powerful men survive by controlling fear, not surrendering to it. I wanted to believe him. Still, every secret has weight. And ours was becoming heavier every day as months passed. The hidden room transformed into something emotionally dangerous because it no longer felt temporary. Clothes started remaining there permanently. Extra shoes, perfume bottles, private conversations, shared routines. Sometimes we even ate breakfast together there before workers arrived. It became a relationship hidden inside another relationship. The workers closest to me probably suspected the truth fully by then, but money and fear kept them silent. Basa rewarded loyalty generously. Employees received better salaries. Renovations improved everybody's working conditions. The restaurant's success benefited them too. Meanwhile, gossip outside continued growing. People noticed his vehicle almost daily. Women from nearby businesses whispered whenever he arrived. Some claimed I had become his woman completely. Others insisted powerful men never invest heavily in restaurants without personal reasons. A few customers even requested the special room jokingly, unaware how uncomfortable those words made me internally. Yet despite the pressure, part of me enjoyed the secret too much. I enjoyed waiting for his messages. I enjoyed hearing security vehicles arrive outside. I enjoyed how he looked at me like I was more than simply a restaurant owner, and most dangerously, I enjoyed the life his presence created around me. Luxury slowly entered my world. Fancy dresses, weekend trips, expensive hotels, jewelry hidden from my husband, quiet nights in private resorts far outside town where nobody recognized us. Sometimes Botasa rented entire sections of places simply to avoid attention, but beneath all the beauty existed emotional dependence neither of us admitted openly. If one day passed without seeing him, I became restless. If he traveled unexpectedly, I felt lonely even inside my crowded restaurant. I had crossed far beyond simple attraction. One rainy evening stands out clearly in my memory even now. The restaurant had already closed. Rain poured heavily across the open compound outside while thunder echoed through distant streets. Electricity kept flickering on and off, leaving parts of the restaurant glowing softly in darkness. Botasa arrived late wearing a dark hood soaked slightly from rain. He looked unusually tired. Political pressure had been intense that week according to news rumors. When he entered the private room, he removed his coat slowly and sat down without speaking for several minutes. I brought him hot food and tea. Then he suddenly looked at me and asked whether I would leave everything behind if he asked. The question shocked me. He clarified slowly. The marriage, the stress, the pretending, the hidden life. For a moment the only sound came from rain hitting the roof outside. I could not answer immediately because despite everything, my marriage still existed legally and emotionally somewhere deep inside me. But another truth also existed now. Botasa had become woven into my daily life so completely that imagining life without him felt impossible too. That was the night I finally realized our secret relationship had grown beyond excitement and crossed into something emotionally consuming, and from that point onward, every decision became more dangerous than the last. For a long time, I truly believed the secret would remain hidden forever. That was the dangerous thing about the life I was living with Botasa in Gonga. The more months passed without discovery, the more confident both of us became. The hidden room behind the restaurant no longer felt temporary or risky. It started feeling normal, comfortable, almost like a second home hidden inside another life. And honestly, that false comfort was what destroyed everything in the end. By then my restaurant had become one of the most talked about places around the area. The open compound outside looked beautiful every evening. Decorative lights hung across the trees and reflected softly against the tiled ground whenever night came. Customers filled the place almost daily. Expensive vehicles parked outside. Music played from live bands during weekends while waitresses dressed elegantly moved between tables carrying trays of grilled fish, wine, and expensive meals. People admired the success, but success attracts attention and attention eventually destroys secrets. My husband had become colder with me during that period. We barely spoke properly anymore unless necessary. Sometimes he stayed away for days. Other times he came home late and slept facing the opposite side of the bed without saying a word. The marriage was no longer warm. It felt like two angry strangers sharing history instead of love. But what scared me most was that he had started investigating quietly. At the time, I did not fully realize it. His younger brother named Samuel had always disliked me secretly even before the marriage problem started. Samuel was the kind of man who noticed everything happening around people. Quiet, observant, too curious for his own good. He used to visit the restaurant often pretending to support the business, but his eyes always looked around too carefully. Sometimes I caught him watching Botasa's vehicles parked outside. Sometimes he questioned workers casually about the private room behind the restaurant. Sometimes he arrived unexpectedly during late evenings and stayed longer than necessary. At first I ignored it because I believed nobody would dare interfere directly with someone as powerful as Botasa. That confidence made me careless. One Friday evening changed everything forever. That day had been extremely busy. The restaurant was full from afternoon until late night because a local music group was performing in the compound outside. The atmosphere was lively. Colored lights covered the open compound while customers laughed loudly over music and alcohol. Smoke from grilled meat filled the air. Expensive perfume mixed with the scent of food and wine. Botasa arrived later than usual with only one security vehicle instead of several. He wanted privacy that night because according to him the political atmosphere around him had become tense recently. Rumors were spreading in government circles. Certain people had started asking questions about his movements. Even though he sounded calm while explaining it, I noticed stress in his face immediately. Still, when he entered the hidden room behind the restaurant, everything outside seemed to disappear for both of us like always. The music from the compound became distant. The loud customers faded into background noise. Inside that room existed only us. We sat together for a long time drinking wine quietly while talking about whether the relationship could continue forever without consequences. I remember he looked unusually emotional that night. Tired, restless, almost afraid beneath the confidence he normally carried. At one point he held my face gently and asked whether I regretted meeting him. I should have answered differently. Maybe everything after that could have changed, but instead I told him no. I told him that despite all the confusion and secrecy, he had made me feel valued during the darkest period of my marriage. Those words affected him deeply. He kissed me slowly while soft music from outside drifted faintly through the walls. For some time we completely forgot about reality again. Forgot about danger. Forgot about people watching us. Forgot that secrets never stay buried forever. Then suddenly everything exploded. A violent banging sound shook the door so hard the entire room vibrated. At first we froze in confusion, then another loud hit followed immediately. Before either of us reacted properly, the door burst open violently. Samuel stood there breathing heavily with pure shock and rage covering his face. For a few seconds nobody moved. The atmosphere inside that room changed so quickly it felt unreal. One moment there had been quiet intimacy and hidden comfort. The next moment everything collapsed into panic and horror. Samuel stared directly at us while the sounds of music and laughter from the compound outside continued normally, almost mockingly, unaware of the disaster unfolding behind the restaurant. Some customers stood up trying to look toward the back area. Others pulled out phones immediately because public disgrace attracts people faster than music or food ever could. I felt like my entire life was collapsing publicly in real time. Eventually Basa security entered forcefully and removed Samuel from the area before things became even worse physically. But the damage had already happened. Completely. The secret was no longer hidden, and once secrets involving powerful men become public, everything changes very fast. That same night Basa left the restaurant earlier than usual. I remember following him outside while trembling emotionally. The beautiful compound that once felt magical now looked terrifying under the lights. Customers stared at us openly. Workers avoided eye contact nervously. The atmosphere felt poisoned. Before entering his vehicle, Basa looked at me seriously and told me to stay calm no matter what happened next. Then he disappeared into the night. I did not realize at the time that it would be one of the last normal moments we would ever share. The following days became hell. Samuel informed my husband immediately after leaving the restaurant that night. I still do not know exactly what he said or whether he showed recordings, but the reaction was explosive. My husband arrived at the house the next morning furious beyond anything I had ever seen before. He smashed plates against walls. He accused me of humiliating him publicly. He shouted that people were already discussing the scandal in workplaces and bars around town. Neighbors heard everything. I could barely defend myself because technically every accusation was true. The marriage collapsed completely. After that day my husband stopped speaking to me except during arguments. Sometimes he disappeared for days drinking heavily with friends. Other times he returned home only to insult me again before leaving. His family turned against me entirely. Some relatives called me shameless. Others claimed I used my restaurant to sleep with rich men for money. Meanwhile the gossip outside became unbearable. Customers who once respected me now came mainly out of curiosity. Workers whispered constantly. Some employees resigned because they feared being connected to scandal involving powerful people. Even suppliers began acting differently toward me, but the strangest part was Basa himself slowly disappearing from the scene. At first he still called me regularly. He promised everything would calm down. Eventually he said political enemies were trying to use the scandal against him. But within weeks his visits reduced dramatically. The luxury vehicles stopped appearing daily outside the restaurant. Security presence vanished. Calls became shorter. Then suddenly newspapers and rumors started mentioning investigations surrounding powerful officials connected to corruption, leaked private affairs, and abuse of influence. People whispered Basa's name quietly everywhere. The atmosphere around him became dangerous. One evening I waited for him inside the hidden room for nearly 4 hours. He never came. The wine remained untouched on the table while distant music played outside in the compound. I remember sitting there alone staring at the same walls that once felt warm and exciting but now only carried shame and emptiness. That room had witnessed everything. The secret meetings, the promises, the hidden affection, the dangerous excitement, and now it felt haunted. Eventually his phone became unreachable for entire days, then entire weeks. Different stories spread across the city. Some people claimed he traveled secretly abroad. Others said powerful people turned against him politically. Some insisted leaked scandals involving women had destroyed important alliances around him. Nobody knew the full truth anymore, but one thing became clear: Basa was disappearing, and as he disappeared, I remained behind carrying the ruins alone. The restaurant started declining slowly after that. Customers still came, but the atmosphere changed permanently. Instead of admiration, people now visited with gossip in their eyes. Workers avoided mentioning his name openly. Some nights the compound felt painfully empty compared to before. The hidden room behind the restaurant remained locked most days after that. I could not bear entering it. Often every object inside carried memories. The curtains, the wine glasses, the chair where he used to sit quietly after stressful meetings. The faint scent of perfume and expensive cologne that seemed trapped permanently inside the walls. Sometimes late at night after closing the restaurant, I sat alone in the compound listening to distant traffic while remembering how quickly everything changed. What once felt glamorous and exciting had turned into loneliness, scandal, and public humiliation. And the most painful part was realizing that when powerful men disappear from scandals, ordinary people are usually left behind to survive the consequences alone.